All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Do us a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, and of course, upvote the video itself. Got a big special treat. Stuart Stevens is in. He's kind of the perspective that we go to whenever we're dealing with Ole Miss history and SEC history. Stuart is just a treasure trove of information. And one of the things that people might not know, he was in the stadium, in Tiger Stadium in 1959, in the game that made Ole Miss and LSU on Halloween famous. And now I'm talking about, hey, the SEC needs to get this game back to Halloween. How you doing, Stuart?
That's great. That was an amazing night. I was a kid. My dad had gone to Ole Miss. My grandfather had gone to Ole Miss. My mother had gone to Ole Miss. My mother came to Ole Miss from LSU to start the Kappa sorority. She opened the first chapter. That was how she ended up, and as she used to refer to it, the wasteland of Oxford, because she came from New Orleans. That was an amazing game. I mostly remember it because there were all these drunk LSU fans, like some in costumes and being terrified. But what I remember so vividly about it is driving back to Jackson with my father. I don't think he said a word the entire drive. And from then, those days to drive from Baton Rouge to Jackson, I'm sure it took a lot longer than it does now. But it was, I love those rivalries. And it's so much of the essence of college football. It's something you'll never have in pros, that as personal a rivalry.
Yeah, it's almost, and even though players might come from everywhere else around the country, and the starting quarterback from Ole Miss is from Utah, but at its core, at its whole, like Ole Miss versus anybody, it's a civic game. It's our guys against your guys, and it really doesn't matter where they're from, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I've been fascinated by the role that college sports, particularly college football in the South, played in changing our society. The way I think it played a role a lot like rugby did in South Africa, from what I read. It's the first time like blacks and whites cheered for each other in a minute. And I think that's just fascinating as a collective civic experience of bringing people together. Which is the essence. I mean, homecoming means sort of a resonance of coming home, of going back. It's more than just going back to where you went to school. It's a sense of, coming back to this place that means something. And in my family, when I grew up, we still had a lot of games at Memorial Stadium. And we lived in Belhaven. You could walk to Memorial Stadium, which, I did many times with my dad. And you would hear the games. It was so cool. But, my parents were big party goers, just like good Ole Miss grads were. And we, before all these games, like before the Arkansas game, they'd have like a big hog roast. And this was such a, part of my growing up. And that's when we had bootleggers, so like bootleggers would come. And it just became such an imprinted part of my past, which is why, I wrote this book called The Last Season. When my dad turned 95, I was in 2013. I had worked in the Romney campaign in 2012. There you go. And if you haven't heard, we lost. And I had just turned 60, and I was kind of, I've been involved in presidential races. When you win and you lose, it's a lot. You kind of ask yourself more questions about life when you lose, like, why, what happened? What did I do wrong? And we decided to go to all the Ole Miss football games in the 2013 season. And my mom went, which gave it kind of a driving Miss Daisy quality. And it was a great experience. I'm really glad. My dad at 95 still, was up and around. And, we didn't set any land speed records getting out of the car into the stadium, but it was great. It was a great experience. It was a classic Ole Miss year, too, though. Hugh Freeze's first year, and had all this opportunity, and then we lost the Egg Bowl. Because, Prescott came in at the end of the game, he'd been hurt. They brought him in, and you could just feel like, oh, this is going to happen. And it was that, terrible thing when Bo fumbled in the end zone. It was just a classic heartbreaker Ole Miss game, cold, rainy night in Starkville. You left wondering why the universe hated you.
Yeah. Well, there's been many nights where it's been the opposite feeling for State fans as well. That's just the nature of that game, I do believe. And speaking of which, we're going to go back to the original topic, the LSU Halloween thing. Is that a game that you associate now with Halloween? Is that something? Am I crazy with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, man, because it was that whole, the fog on the field, this whole sort of and at least to this kid, Tiger Stadium was kind of like the ultimate haunted house that you were going into, and it had this legitimately spooky feel to it. And this sort of sense like something weird is going to happen here. And it'd be so great to get that back on Halloween. This is, it's a legendary game for a reason.
Yeah. And it's one of those games that Ole Miss will always be associated with. I mean, and LSU fans will tell you that they don't have a rivalry and they'll try to be cool. But Ole Miss has went down there twice in the last decade, 7-0, and LSU has stormed the field both times. This game means something to them as well.
Listen, brother, I listen to your podcast I do all the time, but I listen to it all that week before the LSU game. And you called it. And it started so great. And then when it started to go south, I was like, oh man, Steven's right. This is not going to be good.
Yeah.
And it ended up a lot worse than any of us could have imagined. And they stormed the field. Mm-hmm. You don't do that, it's not a big game.
Yeah. It's like I tell people all the time, like the Auburn people that constantly end up in my thread on these YouTube videos. It's like, if it's not a rivalry and you don't care, then act like it.
Act like you don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but, there's other rivalries that Ole Miss could get back whenever the schedule is done, sort of get back. There's a game, historically, Tennessee has been a decent game. The division's kind of ruined that, and they hadn't played but 5 times in 25 years. But Tennessee every other year, that's going to become a big game. Georgia every other year. That is a team that Ole Miss traditionally has played a decent amount of time. What do you feel about the chance to get these games at least semi-regularly back?
I think it'll be fantastic. I went to I guess it was the last Georgia Ole Miss game when Georgia was at home in Ole Miss, and Ole Miss beat them. That would have been 2016. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2016. I remember it was the hottest day. I thought I was going to die. And I couldn't imagine these guys out there playing. And that was Kirby Smart's first year, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I look at that game, and Ole Miss won easily. And, I had a bunch of buddies that went to Georgia. I saw them in the Grove before. And they were like, we're going to lose. We're not very good anymore. And I think about that when you think about how Kirby Smart has turned that around. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really astounding. And really goes to the difference a coach can make. But that was when I was growing up, that was one of the great rivalries. I mean, we used to drive to go to that game. And just the whole, that's such a great stadium where they play, and that whole intense feeling about it. That's a tremendous, as is a Tennessee rivalry, mm-hmm. which is why it was so heartbreaking that Peyton went there. It was it bothers me less that Arch is going to Texas, but to go to Tennessee, particularly at that time, when Tennessee was a big rival, it was, still mm-hmm. Smarts.
Yeah, it's absolutely weird. And you talk about Georgia. I remember whenever I was a kid in the 80s and the 90s going and seeing Vince Dooley teams and Lars Tate and Garrison Hurst. I mean, every other year they were in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium, and their band playing Jeremiah Was a Bullfrog, and the different really specific things, because their Redcoat band is really specific in this age when It seems like half the bands play the same stuff. They were very unique, and it'll be nice to have that back in a semi-regular time, even though Georgia right now is honestly what Alabama was 10 years ago.
Yeah, we'll see how great that's going to feel after we play them. I mean, just as I said, tell me there's reason to be hopeful that we could be either Georgia or Alabama at home this year. I just want to live in, at least if it's a fantasy, I want to entertain that fantasy so my life is happier the next year.
Oh, you want to know what it's like to be Stephen Willis? I can do this. I've got this. This is teed up for you. All right. Alabama, we get them in September with a new offensive coordinator that's 30 years old and a new defensive coordinator that we're at least somewhat familiar with, but it is going to be new. You have a head coach that is very familiar in what Nick Saban likes to do and a defensive coordinator that has spent the last 5 years with them. So you want to get Alabama in September, as supremely talented as they are. The timing kind of sets up for Ole Miss next year. If Ole Miss is going to get them, they can get them. They just don't need to lose to the laundry. They don't need to lose to the helmet, which Ole Miss does with Alabama for whatever reason from time to time. I've seen Deuce and Eli go over there and just get embarrassed against teams that they had no business losing to. Against Georgia, the only thing I've got, I don't have much on this one, is Mike Bobo is the new offensive coordinator. Todd Monken is going to the NFL, so the offense is going to look a little different. No Stetson Bennett. So if there's a situation where the defense, which is always going to be good, is a little bit off, is the offense going to be good enough to pick them up? That becomes the question there. Georgia, a little bit less. I think Alabama's gettable, though.
One other question you probably don't want to answer. At that Georgia game, who's going to be the Ole Miss quarterback?
I think Jackson Dart's going to be the quarterback. Yeah. I'm going to do a show in the next couple of weeks of how I predict this quarterback competition to go out.
Oh, great. I love that, man.
I think Jackson Dart's going to win the job. Walker Howard's going to be the backup, and Spencer Sanders is going to be the third guy. The loser between Jackson Dart and Spencer Sanders is going to be the third string quarterback because Walker Howard, immense talent. He's basically, if you watch him on Huddle.
I've never watched it. Is he really that great? Yeah.
It looks like you're watching Matt Corral film.
Yeah.
And they're going to get him developed and get him ready to go because this is what I think they want. And I've said this over and over again. I think they want either Jackson Dart to win the job, really kick butt and go pro after this year. Yep. Or they want Spencer Sanders to just win the job. So in 2024, it becomes Walker Howard's job. I really think they're wanting to part the Red Seas for this guy.
So obviously, Spencer Sanders bet on the latter scenario.
Mm-hmm.
He come to sit on the bench.
Yeah, if you look at them statistically, they're the same quarterback. They throw about 9-10 picks a year. They throw for about 3,000 yards. They run for about 6. Statistically, it's uncanny. They do it different ways. And Jackson Dart needs to figure out how to get the ball out of his hand quicker and use all parts of the field. And I think Spencer Sanders is going to pressure him to do that.
I got to ask this. What was the conversation like between Lane Kiffin and Spencer Sanders to get him to come to Ole Miss? How does that go? What does he say? At that time, Walker Howard had not committed, right? Or had he?
No, Walker Howard committed first. Yeah, Spencer Sanders came in on top of that.
How does that conversation go?
I just think Spencer Sanders, he's a 4-year starter at Oklahoma State. He's a former Big 12 Freshman of the Year. He's probably an immensely confident dude like quarterbacks at these Power 5 schools are, and he just thinks he's going to come in and win the job. I honestly think that's it. I don't know if there was that much to sell. I think he likes the offense and what Lane Kiffin does once it gets going. Lane Kiffin probably showed him film of Matt Corral and said, "This is what we want to do. Can you do it?" And Spencer Sanders yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it is. I know this is off topic, but it is the most talented quarterback room
in my lifetime. Probably the last time it was this talented, Glenn Griffin and boys were patrolling the quarterback room at Ole Miss
with Jim Weatherly.
Yeah, those guys was the last time it was this stacked.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. But here's the key, in my opinion, on this quarterback competition is we can't do what we did last year. We have
and
to
let
have
them,
it settled by week 3.
You know, I remember you saying this at the time, and it never really made sense to me until you saw how much better he got.
Mm-hmm.
And then by playing, I mean, you knew that was going to happen. I didn't really get that. And then you go back and you say, okay, if that level had played earlier, what level would he have been, for those last games? It's a really good point.
If Jackson Dart would have won the job at the beginning of the season, Ole Miss would have beat Alabama. I'm convinced of it.
That last series.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Would have absolutely happened. Now, the problem with that Alabama game and stuff like that is Quinshawn needed somebody to spell him. After Zach Evans got hurt, it became harder. So we're hoping that like Kedrick Riscano, one of the new guys, come in and does a really good job and props them up. Stuart, real quick before we get out of here, I do want to say this. We've gone the other way about rivalries potentially being renewed, maybe LSU back to Halloween. There is one negative to Ole Miss fans, and that is the fact that they might lose the every year game with Arkansas because they've tried to shoehorn them with LSU. It didn't really happen.
Right.
They're trying to shoehorn them with Missouri. It didn't really happen. Arkansas's SEC rival has been and always has been the Ole Miss Rebels. It might not have a trophy, but that game goes back to the 50s. So we might be about to lose that as an every year game, but this is why I'm not overly upset with that, and it's more of a happiness for them. It looks like them and Texas is going to become an every year game. And that game,
and that was a great rivalry.
Yeah, that game every year was fantastic. There was a game, I think, in '69, the year Eli beat Arkansas in the Sugar Bowl. Texas versus Oklahoma, 1-2. Richard Nixon in Vietnam watching the game. It was a huge, massive game, and I'm excited for Arkansas to have that game back.
Yeah, listen, we were talking earlier. I still have post-traumatic stress about Arkansas. When I was a kid, the Arkansas game was a big game. And my parents would always have like these hog roast games and stuff like that. And, one of my father's like favorite sayings, like the hogs are tough. The hogs are tough. And they always were. And then some of us are going to be haunted forever with 4th and 25.
Yeah.
Someone asked me how long did it take to get over that, and I said I'll let you know when it happens. It hadn't happened yet, but I love the intensity of that how much they love their football program, and that's one of the things I loved about this last season. I loved seeing Tennessee come back, and for those fans that have kind of been in the wilderness, to come back and have this moment. I mean, it was such a sort of great, joyful thing. You could just see what it meant to them. And that's the essence of college football that you just will never get on a pro level. That's sort of what it means to a wider audience or wider civic thing that is so great.
Yeah, and some people will talk about the level of football and everything, but it will never compare to the college game to me. NFL games, I'm not even going to play fantasy football next year. I'm going to watch some games. It just doesn't hold my interest in the way that college football does. It just doesn't.
Yeah, they're like different sports. What it means to lose in college, I think, is so much greater than what it means to lose for the pros. But for one thing, a lot of these guys, they'll know they'll never play football again. That are on that field. Which I think was kind of the heartbreak of the way Ole Miss season ended this year. I just felt so sorry for those seniors, that they could have gone the other way. But, we're undefeated in 23.
Exactly. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Make sure you check out our new brand new podcast, Locked On College Basketball. It has everything you need to know about college basketball in one place. Plus, hear from big-name experts, insiders, coaches, and players. Locked On College Basketball, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Hopefully, coming soon, Ole Miss basketball can at least get to a level that we can start to enjoy it again, but I'm not going to hold my breath for a little bit on that one. We'll see what happens. Anyway, thank you, Stuart, for stopping by the show.
Thank you. I love the pod. I listen to it all the time, brother.
Yeah, we're gonna have you back. Like I said, you are our perspective about all things Ole Miss from back in the day. The stuff that I don't know, I consider myself an encyclopedia. But the problem is, I bought like a 1994 volume, so it doesn't go back enough. Like the earliest, my first game was Steve Sloan's last game. If that tells you.
I think the golden age of sports for a person is always the first time you became interested in the sport and your team won. Mm-hmm. That will be forever in your, mental memory and psyche as a golden age of sports. And for me, it was, the '62 era when that was like the most incredible for so many reasons year. But it's great to see Ole Miss football back.
Yeah. Mine was Immaculate Deflection. I was in the stadium, Memorial Stadium that day. Wow. And also in Oxford when Cassius Ware almost killed Eric Zier. Those are my two moments.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, brother.
Anyway, take care, buddy. Hope to see you again.
Good to see you.
All right.